The rain in Seattle always had a way of mirroring my mood. A steady grey curtain that fell relentlessly, just like the weight settling on my chest. I was sitting in my living room, the city lights shimmering through the wet window pane, each one a distant, unreachable star. At 48, I'd built a life that felt solid, a successful career in software development, a modest but comfortable home, a quiet routine that I cherished. It was a life I'd painstakingly constructed after years of striving for independence, a deliberate departure from the chaotic, emotionally fraught world I'd grown up in. I thought I had escaped. My phone vibrated, a sharp jolt in the quiet of the evening. It was my mother. My stomach tightened. Calls from her were no longer a simple check-in. They were a prelude to a demand, a veiled request for money, a plea for help that always felt more like an obligation than a choice. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello, Mom," I said, my voice betraying none of the tension I felt. "Oh, Daniel, thank goodness you answered," she began, her voice a fragile whisper. "I was so worried. We haven't heard from you in a while." I let the guilt-laden statement hang in the air for a moment. "I've been busy, Mom, work." "Yes, of course, always so busy," she sighed dramatically. "But I called because, well, we have a problem." The word problem was a low hum of a warning siren. "What kind of problem, Mom?" "It's about the house," she said, her voice dropping. "And the loan. Your father, he had to take out a loan, you see, for a new business venture. It was a sure thing," he said. My father's business ventures were a running joke, a series of ill-conceived schemes that had bled our family dry for decades. He was a dreamer without the drive, a man who saw success as a lottery ticket he was always just about to win. I braced myself. "And?" I prodded. "Well, the business, it didn't quite work out. And the bank is calling. We're behind on the payments. We're going to lose everything, Daniel. Your childhood home, everything we've worked for." I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. "How much are we talking about, Mom?" She hesitated. "It's quite a bit, $150,000, but that's not the worst part." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What is?" "The loan? They said it was a family loan. And they said your name was on it." The words hit me like a physical blow. My name. On a $150,000 loan, without my knowledge, without my consent. My mind raced back through the years, searching for a moment, a document, anything that would explain this. There was nothing. I hadn't signed anything. They must have forged my signature. The realization was sickening. It wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate, calculated betrayal. They had used my credit, my identity, to fund one of my father's fantasies. A choked sound escaped my throat. My name? How? I never signed anything. "Oh, honey, don't be like that," she said, the fragile whisper giving way to a sudden sharp edge of irritation. "Your father needed it, and they said it was easier with your name on it. Your credit is so good, you see. We were just borrowing a little bit of your good fortune for the family." For the family. The phrase was a dagger twisted in the wound. For the family had always been their excuse, the justification for every demand, every manipulation, every sacrifice they'd asked me to make. It was the emotional leash they'd tried to keep me on, even after I had moved 300 miles away. My voice was a low growl. "You used my name without my permission. That's fraud, Mom. Do you understand that? Fraud. Don't be so dramatic, Daniel. It's family. We're talking about your parents, your sister. We're a family. We help each other. We're in trouble. We need you to help us. We need you to bail us out." The words hung in the air, echoing the familiar refrain of my childhood. Help us. Bail us out. It was never a request, it was an expectation. My role in their lives had always been to be the solution to their problems, the stable anchor in their turbulent sea of poor decisions. I leaned forward, my knuckles white as I gripped the arm of the chair. The rain seemed to beat against the window in time with my furious heartbeat. "Bail you out? Mom, you used my name for a $150,000 loan. That's not a little bit of your good fortune. That's my financial future you put at risk. Do you have any idea what this could do to me?" "But we're family, Daniel. We're going to lose the house. What kind of son are you? You have so much and you can't even help your own family? Her voice rose in a crescendo of accusation. After everything we've done for you, the familiar litany of guilt. Everything we've done for you. A constant reminder of the sacrifices they'd made, the emotional debt they believed I owed. It was a debt that was never paid off, a ledger of favors that only ever seemed to grow. I've done a lot for you, Mum, I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and hurt. I've sent you money for bills, helped with your car, paid for medical expenses. I've always been there. But this is different. This is a line you can't uncross. You didn't ask. You just did it. And you expected me to fix it. There was a pause on the other end, a silence filled with the weight of her unspoken frustration. So, you're just going to let us lose the house, she said finally, her voice thin with a new kind of cruelty. You're just going to sit there in your fancy home with your fancy job and let your family become homeless? The manipulation was so blatant, so familiar, that it was almost comical. Almost. Mom, I'm not going to bail you out. I can't. I won't. You did this. You need to take responsibility for it. How can you be so cruel, Daniel? So heartless? The words were a bitter poison. After everything we gave you, this is how you repay us? You're turning your back on your own family. The words struck me, but they didn't land with the same force they once had. Decades of this had hardened me, built an emotional wall that was now a fortress. The pain was there, a dull ache, but it was overshadowed by a new, more powerful feeling. Resolve. I'm not being cruel, Mom, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. I'm protecting myself, and I'm not going to be the one who gets caught in the wreckage of your choices. You made this bed. You need to lie in it. I could hear her sharp intake of breath, a gasp of pure, unadulterated shock. She had never heard me speak to her like this. My silence, my compliance, had been their assumed right for so long. How dare you, she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. How dare you talk to me like that? You are no son of mine. The line went dead. The silence that followed was a deafening roar. I sat there for a long time, the rain still drumming against the window, the city light still a distant, shimmering blur. My mother's final words, "You are no son of mine," echoed in the quiet room. A part of me felt a profound sense of loss, a final severance of a tie I had been trying to mend for years. But a bigger part of me, the part that had been suffocated for so long, felt a strange, liberating sense of relief. The foundation had crumbled, and for the first time in my life I wasn't trying to hold it up. I was standing on my own in the rain and breathing freely. The real battle I knew was just beginning. The next morning, the city was still under a shroud of grey. The air was heavy with moisture and the promise of more rain. I stared at my computer screen, lines of code blurring into an illegible mess. My mind was a vortex of anger and disbelief. The silence from my family since my mother's call had been unnerving. It was the calm before the storm, I knew. They were likely regrouping, strategizing their next move. I couldn't focus on work. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but my thoughts were a million miles away, replaying the conversation, the betrayal, the audacity of their actions. I finally pushed my chair back, stood up and walked over to the window. The world outside looked mundane and normal, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos I was experiencing. People walked by with umbrellas, their faces stoic and focused. They had no idea that a man was standing in a high-rise apartment, his world having just been turned upside down by the very people who were supposed to be his safe harbor. I knew I needed to take action. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore, it was a financial and legal one. They had committed fraud. My first thought was to call a lawyer, but the thought of getting lawyers involved, of dragging my family into a legal battle, made my stomach churn. It felt so final. And yet, what choice did I have? I opened my laptop and typed in the name of a local law firm specializing in financial fraud. A few clicks, and I was on their website reading about identity theft, about forged documents, about the severe penalties. The descriptions felt impersonal, clinical, a world away from the messy reality of a son betrayed by his parents. Before I could make the call, my phone rang again. It was my sister, Lisa. Lisa was a few years younger than me, and her life had always been a mirror of my parents', a series of poor decisions, a reliance on others to fix her problems, a constant state of emotional turbulence. We had been close once, but as I'd pulled away from the family's dysfunction, we drifted apart. "Daniel," she said, her voice tight with a forced calm. "Mom called me. She's devastated." "She's devastated," I retorted, the anger bubbling up instantly. "What about me, Lisa? Did she tell you what they did?" She said you were being difficult, that you won't help them with the loan." "Difficult? She told you they used my name to take out a $150,000 loan without my permission, and that I'm being difficult for not bailing them out?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her processing the information, her mind scrambling to find a justification for their actions. "Well, they were in a bind, Dan," she finally said, her voice softer, more conciliatory. "Dad had a great business idea. They thought they could pay it back quickly. They never meant to hurt you." "Never meant to hurt me?" I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Lisa, they committed a crime. They jeopardized my credit, my finances, my life. And you're telling me they never meant to hurt me?" "But they're Mom and Dad," she cried out, her voice breaking. "They're desperate. They're going to lose the house. Where are they supposed to go?" "That's not my problem, Lisa. It's their problem. They created it. They need to solve it. You're their son. You have a good job. You can afford this. It's just money, Dan. Family is more important than money." The phrase, "family is more important than money," was another of their classic refrains, a tool of emotional blackmail they had wielded for years. It was always used when they wanted something, never when they were giving. "Don't you dare lecture me about what's important," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I worked my ass off to get where I am. I didn't have a safety net. I didn't have family to fall back on because they were too busy chasing pipe dreams and borrowing money they couldn't pay back. And now you're telling me I should give it all away to fix their latest disaster. They're old, Daniel. They're scared. Don't you have any compassion?" "Compassion?" I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "I have compassion for the man I used to be, the one who was always trying to earn their love by fixing their mistakes, the one who gave and gave until he had nothing left. I have compassion for him, and I'm not going to let them do that to me again." The line was quiet for a moment. I could hear Lisa's ragged breathing, a testament to her distress. I knew she was torn, caught between her loyalty to our parents and the uncomfortable truth of what they had done. They said, "If you don't help, they'll have to tell everyone what you did," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "What I did? What did I do?" I asked, a wave of confusion washing over my anger. They said you're not helping them, that you're letting them lose their home. They said they'll tell all the relatives, all the friends, that you're a cruel, heartless son." My jaw clenched. The threat was so typical, so utterly predictable. They were going to weaponize public opinion, to turn me into the villain in their narrative. They weren't seeking help. They were seeking a new victim, a scapegoat for their own failings. "Let them," I said, the words surprising even myself with their finality. "Let them tell everyone. I have nothing to be ashamed of. They are the ones who committed fraud. They are the ones who put their own selfish needs above the well-being of their own son. Let them tell their story. I'll tell mine. And maybe, for the first time, people will see the truth." Lisa didn't respond. I could hear her silent sobs, and a pang of pity shot through me. I knew she was hurting, but I also knew that her pain was a direct result of her complicity in their dysfunction. I couldn't save her from it. I had to save myself. "Lisa, I'm sorry," I said, the apology a strained whisper. "I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this, but I'm not going to be their ATM anymore. I'm not going to be their fall guy. You need to understand that, and you need to decide where you stand." I hung up the phone before she could say another word. The room felt heavier now, filled with the ghosts of a family I no longer recognized. I walked to the window and watched the rain wash the city clean, a silent, cleansing ritual. The clouds were still there, dark and threatening, but for the first time I felt a flicker of hope. I had stood my ground. The web of manipulation was unraveling, and for the first time, I was the one holding the threads. The next chapter I knew would be about weaving a new one, a stronger one, built on honesty and self-respect, not on the fragile, broken threads of a family's deceit. The call with my sister had left me feeling raw and exposed. The threat of public humiliation, of being painted as the heartless villain, was a new, uncomfortable layer to this conflict. I knew my parents would follow through. They had always been masters of public perception, presenting a facade of a loving, close-knit family to the outside world, while the reality was a tangled mess of codependency and deceit. My apartment, usually my sanctuary, now felt like a cage. The silence was oppressive, filled with the ghosts of old memories, moments of a childhood I was now forced to re-examine through a new lens. My mind drifted back to a time when things felt simpler, before the weight of their expectations became a crushing burden. I remembered being 10 years old, a skinny kid with glasses and an insatiable curiosity about how things worked. My father, with a rare burst of enthusiasm, had bought a dilapidated old car, a '68 Mustang, with the grand plan of restoring it. "A project for us, son," he'd said, his eyes gleaming with the promise of a future masterpiece. I was thrilled. I spent hours in the garage handing him tools, watching him work and dreaming of the day we would drive it down the street, a father-son victory lap. But the project, like all of his projects, was abandoned. The car sat rusting in the driveway, a symbol of a dream unfulfilled, a promise broken. I remembered my mother, a constant whirlwind of anxiety, her life a perpetual state of crisis. When I got a good grade on a test, she would beam with pride. But a week later, she'd be crying about a bill, a problem with her job, a fight with my father. My successes were celebrated, but they were always overshadowed by their failures. The message was clear. My achievements were not a source of joy for me, but a source of salvation for them. I was the good one, the smart one, the one who would get a good job and a stable life, and most importantly, the one who would be able to save them when the time came. My parents' lives were a series of grand plans and spectacular collapses. They lived in a perpetual state of emergency, a thrilling, exhausting drama that I was an unwilling participant in. They were not malicious people, not in the traditional sense. They were simply irresponsible. They were children in adult bodies, expecting the world to bend to their will, expecting others to clean up their messes. And for a long time, I was the one with the broom. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, the memory of the rusty Mustang and my mother's anxious tears replaying in my mind. I needed an anchor, a connection to a world that made sense. I called Mark, my best friend since college. He was a pragmatic, no-nonsense kind of guy, an IT consultant who lived in a different city, but had always been my rock. "Hey man," he said, his voice easy and familiar. "You sound like you've been run over by a truck. What's up?" I took a deep breath and recounted the story, from the initial call to the forged loan to my sister's veiled threats. I told him about the $150,000, about the fraud, about their cruelty. I laid it all out, the ugly, painful truth of it. I didn't hold back. I told him about the years of emotional manipulation, the constant expectations, the way they had always treated me as a resource to be exploited, not a person to be loved. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I braced myself for his reaction. I was afraid he would tell me I was being too harsh, that they were my parents, that I should try to find a way to help them. I was preparing to defend my position, to justify my decision. "That's insane, Dan," he finally said, his voice laced with pure disbelief. They did that. They used your name for a loan?" "Yes. And now they're calling me cruel for not bailing them out." "Cruel?" he scoffed. "They committed fraud. That's a crime, dude. A serious crime. They're lucky you're not pressing charges." A wave of relief washed over me. His words were a balm to my soul. He saw it for what it was. He didn't try to sugarcoat it, to find some redeeming quality in their actions. He saw the betrayal, the audacity, the sheer, unadulterated selfishness. "I know," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I feel so exhausted, Mark. Like I've been fighting this battle my whole life, and I'm finally at a point where I just want to stop fighting. I just want to be done." I get it, man, he said, his voice softer now. But you can't just let them get away with it. You can't let them drag you down with them. You need to protect yourself, and you need to let go of the guilt. You didn't do this to them. They did this to themselves. All you're doing is refusing to be the victim again. His words were a revelation. Refusing to be the victim again. That was it. That was the core of it. For so long I had been the victim, the one whose life was a series of reactions to their crises. Now, for the first time, I was taking control of the narrative. I was the protagonist of my own story, not a supporting character in theirs. We talked for another hour about the logistics of my situation, about the legal ramifications, about the emotional fallout. He gave me a contact for a financial advisor and a good lawyer. He gave me practical advice, but more importantly, he gave me validation. He saw my pain, my anger, my frustration, and he didn't try to minimize it. After the call, I felt a new sense of clarity. The oppressive grey of the day still hung in the air, but the emotional storm inside me had begun to clear. The ghosts of the past, the broken promises and unfulfilled dreams were still there, but they no longer held the same power. I was not that 10-year-old boy anymore, waiting for a car that would never be built. I was a man, standing on his own 2 feet, ready to face the future, a future I would build on my own terms. The war had begun, and for the first time, I felt ready to win. My parents' strategy, as I had predicted, was to turn the narrative on its head. Within a week, the first email arrived. It was from my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, a woman who had always been overly sentimental and deeply involved in family drama. The subject line read, "I am heartbroken for you and your family." My heart sank as I opened it. The email was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation. It spoke of my parents' desperate situation, their imminent homelessness, and their devastation over my refusal to help. It didn't mention the fraud, the forged signature, or the $150,000 loan. It painted a picture of a devoted, elderly couple in dire straits, and their cold, unfeeling son who was abandoning them in their time of need. The final line, a sting of emotional blackmail, read, "I always thought you were a good boy, Daniel. I am truly disappointed." A cold fury washed over me. They were not just content with turning my sister against me, they were going for the whole family, and presumably their entire social circle. I could imagine my mother's tearful phone calls, my father's defeated sighs, the carefully crafted story of a son who had forgotten his roots, a boy who had become too successful, too selfish, to care for the people who raised him. The emails and texts continued to trickle in. My cousin, my uncle, even a few of my parents' old friends. The messages were all variations on the same theme. Why won't you help them? They're your parents, Daniel. This is so unlike you. The pressure was immense, a silent, relentless wave of judgment and condemnation. I felt an urge to respond to each of them, to explain the truth, to lay out the facts. I wanted to tell them about the forged loan documents, about the years of emotional and financial support I had already given, about the betrayal that had finally pushed me to my breaking point. But a wiser, calmer voice in my head, a voice that sounded a lot like Mark's, held me back. If I reacted, I would be playing their game. I would be on the defensive, justifying my actions, proving my worthiness. Their goal was to provoke a reaction, to drag me into their drama, to make me a participant in their public trial. I decided to do the opposite. I would not engage. I would let their narrative hang in the air, a flimsy, one-sided story that would inevitably fall apart under its own weight. I deleted the emails. I blocked the phone numbers. I created a wall of silence. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. The urge to defend myself was powerful, a primal need to be understood, to be seen as the good guy. But I knew that my worth was not determined by their opinion, or the opinion of people who were only hearing one side of the story. My truth was my own. A few days later, my father called. It was the first time I had heard from him since the initial call from my mother. His voice was not filled with rage or desperation, but with a surprising, almost sickeningly saccharine sweetness. "Daniel, son," he began, a honeyed charm I hadn't heard in years. "Your mother and I have been talking, and we understand. We really do. We were a little hasty. We were scared. But we think we have a solution." I said nothing, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "We spoke to the bank," he continued, a note of false triumph in his voice. "They said we can get a new loan, a bigger one that will pay off the old one and leave us with a little extra for our living expenses. And we just need one more signature, a cosigner, just to get it over the line." My blood ran cold. The audacity. They weren't just asking me to bail them out, they were asking me to double down, to get even more deeply entangled in their web of deceit. They had learned nothing. They had seen my refusal as a temporary obstacle, not a final boundary. "Dad," I said, my voice a flat line of disbelief. "Are you serious? You just asked me to co-sign another loan after you used my name for the last one? It's different this time, son, I promise. We'll be more careful. It's for the family, Daniel. Just this one last time." The phrase was a punch to the gut. The casual way he threw it out, the years of manipulation wrapped up in a few simple words. It was like they were a broken record, playing the same tired song of emotional blackmail over and over again. "No," I said, the word coming out sharp and clean. "The answer is no, not now, not ever. And don't call me again, don't have anyone else call me, this is over. I am not helping you, not with this, not with anything." There was a long silence on the other end, a silence that felt different this time. It wasn't a dramatic pause, it was a stunned silence, a moment of true, unvarnished shock. He had believed, truly believed, that he could talk me into it, that he could charm me into falling for the same old trick one more time. "You're really going to let us lose the house?" he finally whispered, the false sweetness replaced by a raw, wounded hurt. "You're really going to do this to your own father?" "You did this to yourself, Dad," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "And I'm not going to be the one who pays the price. Goodbye." I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The feeling was a strange mix of triumph and sorrow. The public trial, the barrage of condemnations, had not broken me. It had only strengthened my resolve. I had survived their last-ditch attempt to draw me back into their orbit, and I had done so without compromising my values, without sacrificing my well-being for their endless needs. The weight was still there, a constant pressure in my chest, but it was different now. It was no longer the weight of obligation, of guilt, of a debt I could never repay. It was the weight of freedom, a heavy, sometimes lonely, but ultimately liberating burden. The ghosts of the past were still present, but they were no longer in control. I had stared them down, and I had won. The day after my last conversation with my father, I felt a new sense of urgency. The emotional battle had been won for now, but the financial one was just beginning. I couldn't afford to be complacent. I needed to know the full extent of the damage they had done to my credit and my financial standing. I spent the morning on the phone, a process that was as frustrating as it was necessary. I called my bank, my credit card companies, and the 3 major credit bureaus. I explained the situation to each of them, a story that felt more surreal with every retelling. The credit bureau representative was the most helpful. She listened patiently to my story, and then with a professional calm explained the process. "We can place a fraud alert on your account," she said. "That will notify any potential creditors that your identity may be at risk, and we can start the process of disputing the loan. We'll need documentation from you, of course, to prove you didn't authorize the loan." "Documentation?" I asked, my voice tight. "I don't have any documentation. I never signed anything. They forged my signature." "We understand," she said, her voice remaining level. "We'll need you to file a police report, a report of identity theft. That's the first step in proving the fraudulent activity." The words hung in the air. Police report. The thought of it was a bitter pill to swallow. I would be, in effect, reporting my own parents to the police. It was a line I had never wanted to cross, a final, public act of severance. But I knew it was necessary. If I didn't, the loan would remain on my credit report, a dark stain that could prevent me from getting a new car loan, a mortgage, or a business loan in the future. I was being held hostage by their recklessness, and the only way out was to make it official. I hung up the phone, a knot of dread in my stomach. I opened a new browser tab and searched for the local police department's website. I found the section on identity theft and began filling out the online report. The process was cold and clinical, a series of boxes to be checked, facts to be stated. Name of perpetrator, unknown. But I knew. I typed in my name, my address, and the details of the fraudulent loan. As I filled in the form, I felt a new wave of anger, this one sharper and more focused than the others. It was not just about the money or the public condemnation. It was about the cold, hard reality of what they had done. They had stolen a piece of my identity, a part of my carefully constructed life. They had, in a sense, stolen from my future, mortgaged my peace of mind for their own selfish desires. And now I was forced to take this drastic, painful step to reclaim what was mine. I hit submit and leaned back in my chair, the screen light casting a pale glow on my face. It was done. The report was filed. The first official step had been taken. Later that day, I had an appointment with a financial advisor Mark had recommended. His name was Michael, a kind-faced man in his 50s with a reassuringly calm demeanor. I sat across from him in his office, the city's skyline visible through a large window behind him. I laid out the whole story, from the initial call to the forged loan to the public condemnation and the police report. Michael listened patiently, his hands clasped on the desk in front of him. When I was finished, he didn't offer platitudes or emotional advice. He simply reached for a pen and a notepad. "Let's look at the numbers," he said, his voice calm and professional. "What is your current income? What are your savings? What is your credit score now?" I rattled off the figures, the cold, hard facts of my financial life. He jotted them down, his pen scratching against the paper. "Okay," he said, looking up, his expression unreadable. "Here's the reality. This loan, if it remains tied to your name, will significantly impact your credit score. It will make it difficult, if not impossible, for you to secure any kind of substantial loan in the future. The amount is too large to simply ignore." "I know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "That's why I filed the police report." "Good," he said, a faint smile on his lips. "That was the right thing to do. Now, here's what we need to do. We need to document everything. Every email, every text message, every conversation. We need to gather as much evidence as possible to prove that you were a victim of fraud. The more evidence you have, the stronger your case will be with the credit bureaus and the bank." He outlined a plan of action, a step-by-step guide to reclaiming my financial life. It was a long, arduous process, one that would require patience and diligence. But as he spoke, I felt a sense of hope blooming in my chest. This was a battle I could win. This was a problem I could solve. Unlike the emotional problems of my family, this one had a clear solution, a path forward. As I left his office, the rain had finally stopped. The sun, a rare and beautiful sight in Seattle, was breaking through the clouds, casting a golden light on the wet pavement. I walked to my car, the air feeling fresh and clean. The world was still there, the one I had built for myself. It was not broken. It was simply under attack. And I was no longer running from the battle. I was preparing to fight. The financial reckoning had begun, and I was ready for it. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork and phone calls. I spent hours gathering documents, writing emails to the credit bureaus, and working with the police to get the fraud report properly processed. It was a monotonous, exhausting process, but with each completed task, I felt a little more of the suffocating weight lifting from my chest. The barrage of messages from my family and their friends had finally stopped. The public trial had ended, not because they had found me innocent, but because I had refused to participate. My silence had been my shield. The void where their constant drama used to be was now filled with the quiet, focused work of rebuilding my life. I hadn't heard from my sister Lisa since our last tense conversation. I thought she had chosen their side, had decided that her loyalty to our parents was stronger than her bond with me. A part of me was hurt by this, but a bigger part of me understood. It was a survival mechanism for her, a way of staying in their good graces, of not being cut off from the only family she had ever known. One evening my phone rang. The screen showed an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, but a strange premonition, a flicker of curiosity, made me change my mind. I answered, and a familiar voice, thick with unshed tears, came through the line. "Daniel." It was Lisa. "Lisa," I said, my voice filled with surprise. "Why are you calling from a different number?" "They took my phone," she said, her voice a fragile whisper. "Mum and Dad, they said I was talking to you too much, that you were a bad influence." A wave of protectiveness, of old familiar anger on her behalf, washed over me. "They what? They took your phone?" "Yeah," she sniffled. "They said I was being disloyal, that I needed to choose a side, and I told them I couldn't do this anymore. I told them what they did to you was wrong, and they said I was cruel too." My heart ached for her. She had finally reached her breaking point. She had seen the truth, and she had spoken it, and for that she was now experiencing the same emotional punishment they had been trying to inflict on me. "I'm so sorry, Lisa," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "I'm so sorry you're going through this." "I'm not," she said, her voice suddenly stronger. "I'm not sorry, I'm just tired. I'm tired of the lies. I'm tired of the drama. I'm tired of being afraid to tell them they're wrong. I see it now, Daniel. I see what you've been saying all these years. It's a game to them, a sick game, and we're just their players." The words were a revelation. This wasn't just a plea for help. This was a confession, a moment of profound, painful clarity. She had finally opened her eyes and seen the truth of their relationship, a truth I had been trying to show her for years. "What happened, Lisa?" I asked, my voice gentle. "What finally made you see?" She took a shaky breath. "Dad came to me and asked me to help him with the loan. He said he needed my signature too, that you were being selfish, and he needed a new co-signer. He said it was for the family, that I was their only hope. And I just couldn't do it. I looked at the documents and I saw your name on the forged signature, and I couldn't lie, I couldn't be a part of it." Tears were streaming down my face now, tears of relief and sorrow. My sister had been faced with the same choice I had been, and she had chosen the painful path of integrity over the easy path of complicity. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know," she said, her voice filled with a desperate uncertainty. I have nowhere to go. I don't have any money. I don't know what to do." For the first time since this whole ordeal began, the old familiar feeling of responsibility washed over me. She was my sister. She was in trouble. But this time, it was different. She wasn't a willing participant in their scheme. She was a victim just like me. "Do you have a passport?" I asked. "Yeah. Why?" "Go to the airport, buy a plane ticket, come to Seattle. Now, don't tell them, just go. I'll send you the money for the ticket right now, and I'll meet you at the airport. You can stay with me, for as long as you need to." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her sobbing, a mix of relief and fear. You'd do that?" she whispered, her voice incredulous. "Of course I would," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You're my sister. You're my family. The real family. The one that's not built on lies and manipulation." She agreed. We made a plan. I hung up the phone and immediately went to my computer, my hands trembling as I purchased the plane ticket. As I did, I felt a new sense of purpose. This wasn't about money or credit scores anymore. This was about saving the one person I truly cared about in my family, the one person who had been willing to stand with me against the tide of their deceit. I wasn't a hero, and I wasn't a villain. I was just a brother, finally standing up for the one person who was worth fighting for. The war had changed. It was no longer a battle of wills, it was a rescue mission, and I was ready to go. The Seattle-Tacoma International Airport was a chaotic sea of people, a microcosm of the world in transit. I stood by the arrivals gate, my heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. I hadn't seen my sister in over a year, and the thought of seeing her now, under these circumstances, was both a comfort and a cause for concern. I had to be her rock, her safe harbor, the stable foundation she had never had. I spotted her first. She looked thin and exhausted, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief. She had a small backpack slung over her shoulder, the only worldly possessions she had managed to grab in her hurried escape. I walked toward her, my own anxiety melting away, replaced by a deep, unwavering protectiveness. She saw me, and a sob escaped her lips. She ran into my arms, burying her face in my chest, her body shaking with silent tears. I held her for a long time, rocking her gently, whispering reassurances into her hair. The chaos of the airport faded away, and for a moment it was just the two of us, a brother and a sister, finally finding solace in each other's arms. "I'm so sorry, Daniel," she finally said, her voice muffled. "I should have listened to you. I should have seen it sooner." "It's okay, Lisa," I said, pulling back to look at her, my hands on her shoulders. "It's okay. You're here now. That's all that matters." I took her to my car, a quiet, reassuring presence beside her. The drive back to my apartment was mostly silent, but it was a comfortable silence, one filled with understanding and unspoken empathy. When we got to my place, I showed her to the guest room, a clean, quiet space with a large window that overlooked the city. She sank onto the bed, her exhaustion finally winning. "I don't know how to thank you, Daniel," she said, her voice a weary whisper. "You don't have to thank me," I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You're my family, the real one." She smiled, a small, tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know they're going to call. They're going to be furious." "Let them," I said, my voice firm. "This is a safe space, Lisa. They can't hurt you here. You're free." She finally broke down, the dam of her emotions finally bursting. She cried for a long time, crying for the years of manipulation, for the broken promises, for the family she had lost and the one she was trying to rebuild. I sat there holding her hand, my heart aching for her. Her pain was my pain, her struggle my own. The next few days were a slow, deliberate process of healing. I helped her get a new phone, a new bank account, and new identification. We spent hours talking, not about our parents, but about our lives, our dreams, our fears. We talked about the things we had never been able to talk about before, the unspoken trauma of our childhood, the silent understanding of what we had both been through. I helped her look for a job, a small part-time position that would give her some financial independence. She was hesitant at first, her confidence shattered by years of being told she was incapable. But with my encouragement, she slowly began to believe in herself again. One evening we were sitting in the living room, a soft rain falling outside, the city lights a distant, shimmering mosaic. She was looking at a job listing on her laptop, a small, confident smile on her face. "I think I'm going to apply for this one," she said, her voice filled with a newfound determination. "It's at a small boutique downtown. I think I'd be good at it." "You would be great at it," I said, my voice filled with genuine pride. "Daniel," she said, her gaze fixed on the screen, "I have to ask you something. What are you going to do about the loan? About them?" I looked out the window, at the city I now called home. "The bank and the credit bureaus are starting to see the evidence," I said. "The police report, the documentation I've been gathering. It's a slow process, but I think I'm going to be okay. It's going to be off my credit report soon. As for them, I don't know. I've been getting calls from a blocked number I haven't answered. They're going to be looking for me," she said, her voice dropping. "I know," I said, taking her hand. "But you're safe here, Lisa, and you're not alone. We're in this together. We'll face it together." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw the fear in her eyes replaced by a quiet, fierce resolve. We were no longer victims. We were survivors. We had a long road ahead of us, a road filled with challenges and uncertainties. But for the first time, I wasn't walking alone. I had my sister, and she had me. Our new beginning, a fragile but beautiful one, had already started, one small, courageous step at a time. The battle was far from over, but the victory of finding each other again felt like all the winning we needed. The inevitable phone call came a week later. It was my mother. The number was blocked, but I knew it was her. I had given my sister strict instructions not to answer, but I knew I had to. I had to face them for myself and for Lisa. I needed to put an end to this once and for all. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello, Mom," I said, my voice flat, betraying none of the emotion I felt. There was a moment of silence on the other end, a pause filled with unspoken fury. "Daniel," she said, her voice a low, dangerous growl, "where is your sister? What have you done with her?" "She's with me, Mom," I said, the words a calm and steady stream. "She's safe. She's happy." "Safe? Happy?" she shrieked, her voice rising in a furious crescendo. "You kidnapped her. You turned her against her own family. You're a monster, Daniel. A selfish, heartless monster." "I didn't kidnap her, Mom," I said, my voice still calm. "She came to me. She made her own choice. A choice to leave a life of lies and manipulation. A choice to find a life of her own." "Manipulation?" My father's voice, a gravelly, defeated sound, came on the line. "We didn't manipulate her. We loved her. We gave her everything. And you convinced her to turn her back on us, on her own parents." "You didn't give her everything, Dad," I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You took from her just like you took from me. You tried to use her as a cosigner, just like you used me. You put her in the same impossible situation you put me in. You didn't love her. You saw her as a solution to your problem. That's not love, that's exploitation." There was a long silence, a heavy, strained pause filled with their disbelief. They had never heard me speak to them with such brutal honesty. They were used to my silence, my compliance, my quiet resentment. This was a new level of confrontation, one they were clearly not prepared for. "She's all we have left, Daniel," my mother sobbed, her voice a theatrical wail. "You've taken everything from us. Our son, our daughter, our home. You have no idea what it's like to lose everything." "I have a good idea, Mom," I said, my voice hardening, "because I almost lost everything. I almost lost my credit, my career, my financial stability. I almost lost my sanity trying to live up to your impossible expectations. You almost took all of that from me, and you didn't even think twice about it." "We're your parents," my father bellowed, a final desperate plea. "We are your flesh and blood. This is what family is about. You help each other." "This isn't what family is about," I said, my voice now filled with a quiet, fierce resolve. "Family is about trust. It's about honesty. It's about loving each other for who we are, not for what we can do for each other. You broke that trust. You violated that honesty. You turned our family into a transaction, and you can't fix it with a sob story and a guilt trip. We're going to lose the house, Daniel," my mother said, her voice now a hollow whisper, a final, desperate card to play. "I know," I said, my voice filled with a final, unshakable sorrow. "And I'm sorry, but I can't save you. You have to save yourselves." "Don't you dare tell us that," my father said, his voice now a low, chilling threat. "We will make sure everyone knows what you've done. We will tell every person we know that you abandoned us, that you let your parents become homeless. You'll see, Daniel. You'll be all alone." "I'm not alone, Dad," I said, looking out my window at my sister, who was sitting on the couch, watching a movie, a small, peaceful smile on her face. "I have my sister, and she's all the family I need." The line went dead. The silence that followed was a peaceful one, a quiet, final closing of a chapter that had been open for my entire life. I had stood my ground. I had said my piece. I had defended my sister, and in doing so had finally, truly and completely defended myself. The final confrontation had not been a battle of rage, but a battle of truth. And for the first time, the truth was on my side, and I was no longer afraid of it. The quiet that followed the confrontation was unnerving at first, a heavy, unfamiliar silence. I still got calls from unknown numbers, but I no longer answered. The barrage of emails and texts had stopped completely. My parents, having exhausted their arsenal of manipulation and public shaming, had finally fallen silent. The silence, however, was not an absence of consequence. The court battle had begun. The bank, now aware of the fraudulent activity, had filed a lawsuit against my parents for the defaulted loan. The process was slow and methodical, a cold and clinical resolution to a messy, emotional affair. I cooperated fully with the bank's lawyers, providing them with the police report, the credit bureau documentation, and my own sworn testimony. It was a painful process, one that forced me to relive the betrayal over and over again. But I knew it was necessary. I was not just protecting myself, I was ensuring that they would be held accountable for their actions. My sister, Lisa, was my constant companion and my greatest comfort during this time. We had fallen into a comfortable routine, a rhythm of shared meals, quiet conversations, and late-night movies. She had found a job at the boutique, and she loved it. She was slowly regaining her confidence, her laughter more frequent, her smile more genuine. One evening, we were sitting on the couch watching a documentary when she turned to me, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Do you think they'll ever change?" she asked, her voice soft. I paused the movie and looked at her. "I don't know, Lisa," I said, my voice honest. "I don't think they can. Their whole lives have been a series of choices that led to this. They're not going to suddenly wake up and become different people. I think this is who they are, and they're never going to be able to see their own part in it. They'll always see themselves as victims." She nodded, a look of profound sadness in her eyes. "It's a different kind of poverty, isn't it?" she said, her voice filled with a strange wisdom. "Not a poverty of money, a poverty of spirit." Her words struck me with the force of a revelation. She was right. Their lives were a wasteland of their own making, a spiritual and emotional desert. They were not poor, they were empty. They had nothing to offer but their own chaos, their own self-pity, their own constant need. The court case reached its final resolution a few months later. My parents were ordered to pay back the full amount of the loan. Their house, the one they had used to hold me emotionally hostage, was foreclosed upon and sold. They lost everything they had, the very thing they had sworn would happen to them. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. I was free, but the cost of that freedom was the complete and total severance of my family. I had won the war, but I had lost the family I had always wished I could have had. A few weeks after the court's decision, I got an email. It was a mass email, a final desperate plea from my mother. It was addressed to everyone in their address book, a long, rambling letter filled with self-pity and thinly veiled accusations. It spoke of their heartless son, of their tragic loss, of their betrayal at the hands of their own family. It ended with a plea for help, a new kind of plea, one for a place to live. I read it, my heart a lump of lead in my chest. I then forwarded the email to Lisa, who was sitting at the kitchen table reading a book. She read it and then looked up at me, a small, sad smile on her face. "They'll never stop, will they?" she said. "No," I said, my voice filled with a final, unshakable sorrow. "They won't." I didn't respond to the email. I didn't forward it to anyone else. I simply deleted it. The ghost of my family had appeared one last time, a final, pitiful reminder of the past, and I was finally able to let it go. The aftermath of the war was a quiet, somber one, but it was a quiet I had never known before. It was the quiet of peace. And for the first time in my life, I was finally able to enjoy it. Life, I realized, doesn't always have a neat and tidy ending. The court case was over, the house was sold, and the calls had stopped, but the emotional scars remained. I was still in therapy, working through the years of guilt and manipulation. Lisa was thriving in her new life, but she still had moments of fear and sadness, moments when the ghosts of our past would come back to haunt her. We were survivors, but we were also healing, and healing is a marathon, not a sprint. We had built a new life together, a life that was our own, one not dictated by the chaos and drama of our parents. We had created our own family, one based on honesty, trust, and mutual respect. Our home, my apartment in Seattle, was no longer just a place to live. It was our sanctuary, our safe harbor, a symbol of the freedom we had fought so hard to win. One rainy Saturday morning, Lisa and I were sitting in a coffee shop watching the world go by. We had both been silent for a while, sipping our coffee, lost in our own thoughts. "Do you ever think about them?" she asked, her voice soft. I looked at her, at the small, confident smile on her face. "Sometimes," I said honestly, "I wonder where they are, what they're doing, if they're okay." "Me too," she said, her voice filled with a quiet sadness. "But then I think about all the things we have now, the peace, the freedom, the fact that we can just sit here, without a crisis looming and just be, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. Me neither, I said, reaching across the table and taking her hand. Our hands, a brother and a sister who had once been so far apart, were now a symbol of our new reality, a reality we had built with our own two hands, our own courage, our own unwavering resolve. We had lost a family, but we had found a new one. We had lost a home, but we had found a safe place to land. We had lost a part of our past, but we had gained a future, one that was finally, truly, and completely our own. The road ahead was still long, filled with uncertainties and new challenges. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was not alone. I was no longer a boy trying to earn the love of his parents. I was a man, standing tall, with my sister by my side, ready to face whatever the world had to throw at us. We had survived the war, and now we were ready to build our peace. The story of my family wasn't over. It had simply begun a new, more hopeful and more honest chapter. The rain in Seattle was still a constant presence, but it no longer mirrored my mood. It was just rain, a quiet, gentle sound, a reminder of the world outside, a world that was now finally our own to explore.